For years, Amanda ruled the dining room like a silent queen, deciding who graced the tables and who was left outside in the chill. Yet fate played a cruel trick when the guest she had so curtly dismissed turned out to be the very soul of the establishment, leaving her stranded on the wrong side of her own door. At the upscale haven nestled in the heart of a glittering district, Amanda had spent nearly a decade perfecting the art of ambience. She meticulously curated a clientele of the influential and affluent, believing that true refinement was sensed, not merely worn. Her unspoken checklist wasn't about designer labels or reservation books, it was about a visceral sense of belonging that only she seemed to command. That quiet afternoon, between the bustle of lunch and the promise of dinner, the restaurant simmered in a rare, serene lull. A few tables played host to executives with loosened ties and elegantly draped women savoring their third glass of wine while murmuring dreams of far-off escapes. Every detail fit Amanda's vision of controlled perfection until the unexpected arrival shattered that calm. The ornate door swung open, drawing her gaze upward. An impeccably dressed black couple entered, he in a sharp, tailored suit and she in a billowing silk blouse, moving with a grace that suggested they owned every room they entered. But it wasn't just them, a teenage boy, fumbling with his tie as though it were a debut, and a little girl clutching an unfamiliar but expensive handbag trailed behind. Amanda's lips tightened into a thin line. She'd seen such scenes before, small groups accompanied by a familiar partner, but never a full family stepping in unaccompanied. With a rigid posture and a hand planted on the polished hostess stand, she watched as the family paused at the entrance, their eyes gliding over the room with a confident ease that whispered of belonging. Clearing her throat, Amanda forced a tight smile and asked, "How may I help you?" The gentleman returned her courtesy with an assured nod. "We'd like a table for 4. Without a moment's hesitation, she replied, "I'm sorry, we're fully booked." Yet something in his calm demeanor, no furrowed brow, no glance of disappointment toward his wife, suggested he wasn't swayed by her claim. Instead, he studied the nearly empty dining room and remarked, "That's strange, there are plenty of open tables." Amanda's grip on the stand grew firmer as a quiet challenge hung in his words. She knew his type well, the kind who would not simply accept a curt refusal. Tilting her head, she offered another strained smile. "Unfortunately, we're holding those tables for reservations." But the unyielding gleam in his eyes promised the night was far from over. Her words rang hollow, the family was no naive wanderer. The woman glanced around once more, her lips a firm line, while the children, one adjusting her handbag strap, the other shifting his stance, waited silently for their father's cue. With a measured exhale, he replied, "All right, we'll wait." Amanda's expression remained unmoved as she curtly repeated, "I'm afraid there will be no openings tonight." A pregnant pause followed. The wife exchanged a meaningful look with her husband, and the boy's eyes flitted between his mother and Amanda. Then, as though expecting nothing less, the man added, "In that case, I'd like to speak with your manager." Her practiced smile faltered at that request. Of course, he was the sort who believed that summoning higher authority might overturn her decision. But Amanda knew all too well, the general manager, Paul, was a rare visitor, and when he did appear, he trusted her judgment implicitly. In a crisp tone, she explained, "The manager isn't available right now." A resigned sigh escaped the wife as she shifted the grip on her chic handbag, while the children stood silently, the boy's jaw set stiffly and the girl seeking reassurance from her father. Yet the man remained unperturbed, his calm demeanor exuding quiet defiance. Finally, he said, "I see," and with a subtle gesture, beckoned his family to follow. For a fleeting moment, Amanda nearly relaxed, until the wife evenly inquired, "Are you sure you don't want to call your manager?" The air trembled with unspoken tension as the family began to move toward the exit. Amanda scoffed inwardly, shifting her weight as she insisted, "I'm positive." The wife's slight, knowing smile confirmed it, and the family strode steadily toward the door. The boy departed without a backward glance, the girl cast one lingering look before trailing her kin outside. For Amanda, this should have marked the end of the evening's routine, but destiny had other plans. As the glass doors began to close, Paul, the general manager, burst forth from the back office like a man on a mission. His habitual sluggishness was gone, his eyes darted around the dining room with anxious urgency before locking onto Amanda. His voice, tight and almost panicked, demanded, "Where are they?" Caught off guard, Amanda frowned and managed a quiet, "Who?" Paul's tone dropped to a near whisper, heavy with a dread she'd never before heard, "The family that just arrived, where are they?" Amanda blinked in confusion. "They left," she offered. At that moment, Paul's face drained of color. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, muttering under his breath, before whirling toward the door. "Damn it!" he exclaimed as he yanked it open with such force that the hostess stand wobbled. Amanda watched, a knot of unease tightening in her chest. Since when did Paul care so much about walk-ins? Curious diners turned their attention as Paul dashed outside, scanning the sidewalk with a rigid intensity. Seconds later, he spotted them, the man softly conversing with his wife, her hand tenderly resting on his back. Paul shouted something, and the man halted mid-step, even as he lingered near the threshold. From inside, Amanda could read the transformation in Paul's body language, the tautness of his shoulders and the urgency in his every movement spoke of an apology in his eyes. Her stomach churned as the wife shifted slightly, her expression unreadable, while the son remained stiff by her side and the youngest clung to her father's sleeve, her fingers gripping the fabric. Then, the very same man whom Amanda had so dismissively turned away nodded once and followed Paul back inside. What secret lay behind their unexpected return? Hesitantly, the wife stepped forward, the children following in silent obedience, and just like that, they re-entered the room. A chill slithered down Amanda's spine as the atmosphere transformed, the clamor of conversation softened, the delicate chime of silverware subdued, and even a nearby waiter straightened his posture as if sensing an undercurrent of disquiet. Still stationed behind the hostess stand, Amanda swallowed hard as Paul rejoined the man at his side. His usual gruff confidence had vanished, replaced by a tremulous caution that bordered on fear. In stark contrast, the man's calm composure remained intact. He wasn't displaying triumph or anger, his measured stride commanded respect without words. Amanda forced out a nervous laugh and inquired, "Paul, what's going on?" But Paul ignored her, instead gesturing toward an exclusive booth, a private nook by floor-to-ceiling windows, a sanctuary reserved for the most distinguished guests. "Right this way, Mr. Bennett," he intoned. At the sound of that name, Amanda felt as though she'd been struck. The Bennetts, she had read about them. Leon Bennett was a self-made titan of industry, a billionaire whose empire spanned multiple luxury ventures and whose name was synonymous with success. And now, here they were, the very owners of the restaurant she had guarded so jealously. Amanda's mouth went dry as Leon Bennett's wife, Camille, glided gracefully into the booth. Their son trailed behind, his posture stiff with formality, while their daughter, barely noticed moments before, settled into her seat with a thoughtful chin resting on her hand. Finally, Leon himself took the last seat, exuding a calm and unshakable control. Paul dabbed a sheen of sweat from his forehead and began, "Mr. Bennett, I am." Leon raised a hand, not in brusque dismissal, but just enough to silence Paul. After a slow, measured exhale, he turned his piercing gaze to Amanda. "And you are?" he asked. Amanda's breath hitched, her heart pounded so fiercely she was sure every ear in the room could hear its rhythm. Before she could muster her introduction, Paul interjected frantically, "This is Amanda, one of our—" His voice trailed off as Amanda, swallowing hard, managed a barely audible, "Amanda." Leon's gaze softened into a quiet scrutiny, then he asked, "Tell me, Amanda, what exactly compelled you to turn my family away?" The question struck her like a physical blow, leaving the room in a stifling silence. Paul flinched, and even a nearby table fell mute. Amanda felt as if unseen eyes were creeping in from every darkened corner. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words emerged. How could she confess that her decision had been based on a snap judgment, that her idea of exclusivity was steeped in something far uglier than mere reservations? The truth was too raw to admit, and so she fell mute, the silence pressing down like an unbearable weight. And in that crushing quiet, the truth began to unravel. Leon leaned back, his face unreadable, but his voice shattered the silence like shards of glass. "We invest in excellence, service, quality, and above all, in people." Amanda's chest tightened as the implication sank in. "Clearly, we must rethink who truly represents our brand." His words struck with the force of a sledgehammer, and in that moment, the floor beneath her seemed to give way. For years, she had been the gatekeeper of this establishment, deciding who belonged and who did not, and now, for the first time, she was on trial. But the ordeal was far from over, the weight of his judgment hovered over her like an inescapable shadow. Paul swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously between Leon and Amanda, yet no one dared break the silence. The entire restaurant had stilled, staff lowering their heads in a feigned busyness while every soul listened intently. Amanda's throat burned with the need to apologize, to offer some redemption, yet before she could speak, Camille's measured voice cut through, "Is this truly how you treat all your guests, Amanda?" Her tone was not raised, but it carried a disappointment so profound it stung. Amanda felt the color drain from her face. "No, she began, but Camille turned her attention to Paul. "Tell me, Paul, is this the level of service this establishment is known for?" Paul's hands trembled as he clasped them together, his face oscillating between panic and forced diplomacy. "Absolutely not, Miss Bennet, this is a dreadful misunderstanding," he managed. Leon's unyielding gaze drilled into them. "Is it?" Amanda's chest constricted painfully as Paul stuttered. I can assure you, Mr. Bennet, Amanda has always been one of our finest employees. This was merely bias." "Bias?" Leon interrupted sharply, making Paul wince visibly. Amanda could barely breathe as Leon tapped a finger against the table. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a decision made the moment you saw us, words that burned because they're true." Her stomach twisted with a pain she had never known. Camille exchanged a brief, knowing look with her husband before casually retrieving a menu, as though the verdict were already sealed. "I assume our meals will be on the house?" Paul blurted, nodding so hastily it seemed almost painful. "Of course, Miss Bennet. Absolutely on the house." Leon leaned forward, his dark eyes boring into Amanda until she felt her breath catch. "You may take the rest of the day off," he declared. Her heart plummeted. It wasn't an outright dismissal, but the message was crystal clear: her time here was over. Desperate to protest, she opened her mouth, but his unwavering gaze silenced her every plea. Her legs trembled as she took a tentative step back while Paul avoided her gaze, and her colleagues offered nothing more than furtive, guilty glances. They all knew the truth. In that crushing moment, Amanda realized with a sinking despair that the guardian of this exclusive realm had now been unceremoniously shown the door. And as the final chapter of her reign closed, the night air held its breath. Stepping out into the cool evening, Amanda's mind raced along the familiar yet now alien streets of a dazzling district. For years, she had walked these avenues with an air of invincible authority, confident in her command of this glittering world. Now, she felt diminished, small, almost invisible, as her trembling fingers reached for her phone. But what could she possibly say? She wasn't being dismissed for a mistake, she was being sent away for a choice she'd made, a choice steeped in prejudice that no handbook could ever define, yet one that had quietly governed every decision. And now, she was paying dearly for it. In the bitter silence of that moment, Amanda recalled the unyielding calm of Leon Bennet, how he had never raised his voice, how his quiet dignity had spoken volumes. And Camille, whose eyes had revealed an unspoken understanding of exactly what had transpired, needed not a single harsh word to condemn her actions. Amanda swallowed hard against the sting of humiliation. A part of her longed to rage, to insist she was merely following an unspoken code, to claim victimhood. But deep inside, she knew the devastating truth: she had been wrong, and no act of contrition could ever undo that error. The night seemed to whisper a final, unyielding verdict. Just then, the restaurant doors swung open once more. Amanda turned swiftly, heart pounding erratically, as Paul emerged, rubbing the back of his neck, his usual aura of command replaced by a look of unfamiliar shame. "Amanda, I don't know what's going to happen," he murmured, before adding, "Mr. Bennet is making calls." A cold dread gripped her. Was she being fired? Her voice, barely a whisper, pleaded, "Is he firing me?" Paul hesitated, then muttered, "I don't know." The silence between them grew heavy until, in a low, regretful tone, he added, "I told you to be careful." Amanda flinched, not at a scolding, but because every red flag she had ignored now stung with regret. With one final, sorrowful glance, Paul retreated back inside, leaving Amanda frozen in the doorway, realizing with crushing clarity that her world had irrevocably changed, and that she alone was to blame. In that silent, shattering moment, the cost of a single decision was laid bare. Life, it seems, has a way of delivering lessons when we least expect them. Amanda had once believed she controlled every outcome, but now she understood that her choices had commandeered her fate. Second chances are rare, and the consequences of one impulsive moment can echo through a lifetime. As she stood under the neon glow of the city, a thought echoed in her mind: what should become of someone who once guarded the gates of exclusivity so fiercely, only to find that the very choices she made have led to her undoing?